your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello and welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 60, the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, including the strategy, people, process, and technology aspects of change. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham. As always, Kyler, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you. Great to have the audience here. Thank you for listening in today. You can find new episodes every Wednesday on all the typical audio podcast platforms, and you can also watch us every Wednesday on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Today's episode is going to be a great one, our 60th episode here today. We're going to start off with a number of hot topics that Kyler's got for us, ranging in a variety of things, ranging from trends in artificial intelligence. We're going to talk about private data and its role in aerospace and defense. We'll talk about digital transformation in multifamily businesses, how to prepare for digital disruption, as well as the new tech workforce that we're seeing in the world today. And then later in the show, we're going to have two segments we're going to play of other guests. One is actually an interview that Kyler hosted with Theresa Richardson from the Third Stage team, talking about social awareness and company culture. So really good interview that she recently had with Theresa. We're going to play you a clip from that, which is actually also featured on our Digital Stratosphere podcast and on the Third Stage YouTube channel as well. But we thought that would be a good topic to show here to the podcast audience as well. And then last but not least, later in the show, we'll have a returning guest. Both guests are returning guests. Theresa has been on the show a few times in the past, as well as our third segment, which is with Jedd Hafer, who's been on the show in the past talking about emotional intelligence, organizational culture, change management, and human type stuff. He's going to be back on the show. Actually, we're going to play a clip that he presented at our Digital Stratosphere virtual event that we hosted in the last few weeks. And by the way, if you missed that event, you can go to stratosphere2022.com and watch the entire conference on demand. There was about, I think, 16 different segments or sessions that we did during that conference. But we're going to play you a clip today from Jedd Hafer, who's an emotional intelligence expert, and he gave an entire presentation on emotional intelligence and really unpacked that a bit more. So we're going to play you that clip later here today. But before we get to our guests here today, what are some of these hot topics you've got in mind for us, Kyler?
Yeah, so we have some interesting industry hot topics. Obviously, we cover a lot of disruption when it comes to changing or transforming of business strategies with the COVID-19 pandemic. And one that we really dug into this week was the multifamily residential business and how that has really gone through a forced transformation. It is an interesting area of overall the business landscape because it can often be very siloed. It doesn't have a ton of vertical industry experience that you can bring from other areas, but it does have tons of opportunity for new technology. If you think through kind of what these multifamily units look like, say an apartment complex, typically you would go in, you would tour the apartment, you would sign the lease, and then move in. A lot of in-person interaction, right? Well, during COVID-19, they had to implement new technologies that allowed them to be able to view videos of rentals instead of actually touring them, the digital signature, an e-commerce site in case there's additional add-ons, those types of things. So it's about 85% of this study that I researched of multifamily real estate leaders said that they could grow revenue with additional technology. So I wanted to get kind of your feedback on that, Eric, in the fact that utilizing things like new technology in real estate has really kind of changed the way we've consumed, not only from a leasing multifamily perspective, but also from, a housing market perspective. And wanted to see if that's something that you think will continue or if it will move to one of those more back in-person experiences.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, and that's one of those examples or use cases in the economy today where I think you're seeing these examples like you just gave, where in the past, yeah, you could have been doing this all along. You could have been using technology to augment the whole experience and maybe save people's time and maybe give them an introductory view of an apartment building, as your example demonstrates. But in the past, we just, for whatever reason, we haven't done it. Maybe it's a human fear of change. Maybe it's a fear of lost value, or I'm not sure what it is. But there's probably a lot of different dynamics that go into play there. But to your point, the COVID pandemic and our limitations socially that transpired from that has forced us to really rethink how we use technology, and that's one great example. You also have like in the healthcare space, it seems like telehealth is becoming a lot more common. That was a trend that was already sort of starting before, but it seems like COVID really just fast tracked that. Even, another example that comes to mind is, a lot of the work we do and a lot of the work I personally do is expert witness work. So you're engaging with lawyers and with courts, and even a lot of the court stuff that used to have to be in person, used to have to testify or be deposed in person. Now that's still a lot of that's still being done over Zoom and Microsoft Teams and virtually. And so, I'll be curious to see if any of these examples or other examples out there will ever return back to normal. But it seems like it's not really going back to normal for a lot of these cases. I think there's probably a middle ground where we'll end up settling, where we'll still use technology, we'll leverage technology in better ways than we have in the past, but we also won't lose sight of the human interaction and the value of meeting in person occasionally and where appropriate. I think the key is just to maybe differentiate or recognize where digital can fully replace the human in-person experience, and maybe other cases where it shouldn't be replacing it long term, or maybe it's just more of an option. At least we have the flexibility to do either or. So that's my view of it.
Yeah, something that's been so interesting is just the immersion of these niche systems. So, for example, we call it prop tech in the real estate space. We've obviously talked about fintech, all those types of things, but really the emerging of these specific systems to meet needs that were never really needs before, and understanding how they can kind of catch up in a very fast timeline. A lot of the real estate companies that I researched struggled with that implementation just because it's never been in their business DNA to really utilize that piece of technology. It's more been on the face-to-face value of relationships with their customers. So definitely a very interesting evolution that we're seeing in those spaces.
Yeah, and I think what you see too in that apartment leasing example is, in a sales driven world or a sales driven industry like that, there's probably a fear, I would suspect, of salespeople feeling like I'm not going to build as strong of a relationship virtually, or I can't build as strong of a relationship virtually, or it's going to be more difficult, which is probably true. I tend to agree with that. I think there is a certain amount of relationship building that gets lost over digital technologies. But I think the key there is just maybe rethinking how you build those relationships. And maybe it's not the way you viewed it in the past. Maybe there's other ways we can be building better relationships, or supplementing what we might be losing by moving to more of a digital model.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into another industry that I've spent some time researching. We call it the Department of Defense, DoD, here in the United States. But this is a global kind of emergence of aerospace and defense trends when it comes to understanding how to best leverage the technology to create a data-driven approach. So, for example, the Department of Defense is known for in the United States not always being super comfortable with partnerships within the commercial or private industry, just because of the sensitive material and that type. They've usually internalized a lot of that. However, they've started to create these really influential partnerships and even departments that discuss the data of commercial satellites. So if you have that type of information in the overall space industry, having the data to actually understand and use predictive analytics, kind of that next step in the data process, to know what kind of the new frontiers are within the space area. So that commercialization, I wanted to get kind of your feedback on, as I know here at Third Stage we do a lot of work within both the public and private sector as well, and just talking about how they utilize that information to make defense-based or really military-based government decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's another great example of how AI and how data in general, not necessarily AI, but just data in general, can be used to make better decisions, whether it's for the military or for a business. And I think what we're seeing with this whole data movement, I guess you call it, in the industry right now, is that organizations like the military of any given nation or any big organization or any organization for that matter is sitting typically on a huge amount of data. They have data in spreadsheets in people's heads on paper, maybe they're in systems, but typically that data siloed. It's not consolidated. It's hard to make meaning or analysis from it. And I think that's where the big push is and where a lot of organizations are really moving now. So military is a great example because any nation's military is going to have a lot of complexities in their data and being able to make use of that and to make better decisions, more strategic decisions based on a lot of different data points is something that's becoming more and more of a competitive advantage for organizations.
Absolutely. And that overall new frontier in innovation, when we talk about big data, a lot of times if we want to monitor something, we're able to throw a sensor on it and that type of thing and get those different data points. Obviously, with space, that's much more difficult to consume and analyze that raw data and predict, is there an issue with some sort of, they talk a lot about space junk in this article. Is there an issue with asteroids, or how do you essentially evaluate those different areas to continue to move forward in that new frontier of almost pioneering, if you will.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting movement. I researched some of what professors were saying, and I know we talked last week to Christina Serrano, a professor at CSU, about kind of the new workforce within technology and the need for kind of more holistic thinking. And this specific professor had talked about business savvy leaders need more evolution in technology. So if you are more business focused and want to go in technology, doing things like learning to code or having some sort of technical skill is something that needs to be included within your portfolio. But also on the other side, technology professionals need to understand the business. I think that's an interesting segue from our conversation about data, because they reference how important it is to understand data, not only from the sense of being able to calculate it, but to consume it and to make strategic decisions with it. So that rise of those abilities to do that, and I think that's definitely where the tech space is going as far as, career assets or stakeholders in the overall pipeline of resourcing.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a huge it's a huge discipline right now that the better organizations and individuals can be in that area. I think the better off we're going to be in the whole world of tech and digital transformation.
Yeah, so I was curious, when you hire new people to third stage, do you usually evaluate the technical skills or more of the business skills, or a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both, but I tend to I shouldn't say this as an overgeneralization, but I tend to lean toward the people that have the business understanding. That's more important to me. Although I will say, as we've grown and as we as an organization have offered more services to our clients, there's been more of a demand for some of these technical skill sets like the data science or architecture and integration of systems, things like that. But if you set aside sort of those specialist sort of roles that are important on the technical side, I tend to lean more towards the business side more than the technology, because I feel like the technology, you can learn that faster and easier than you can learn business and all the nuances that go into operations and supply chains and organizations in general and that sort of thing.
Interesting. Well, good. You hear it first here, all those candidates out there. So take note.
Yeah, work. The email address, if you're interested in a career in consulting, by the way, is work@thirdstage-consulting.com. We're always growing our team and actively looking for new team members. So if you fit the technical and or business profile, third stage is one place you might want to consider.
Certainly. And just on that note, I did a live stream last Friday when this episode's coming out with one of our consultants that is kind of been promoted over and over in the third stage role and is one of our most popular consultants, Mitch Otteson. So definitely go over to our YouTube channel and check that out. He talks about his career path and how he kind of got to where he was. But moving on to some of our other hot topics that I wanted to talk about specifically in the technology, more of the emerging technologies and then the process of implementation. So I was doing some research on kind of the digital disruption and planning for that as a business. And one thing I came across as a recommendation that I wanted to run by you, and I'll read it to you word for word, is consider shorter adoption and implementation cycles. So foster incremental and agile implementation throughout the testing and execution stages. So I know that sometimes we do a phased implementation approach, but it's under my understanding that usually we try and make sure the technology is fully implemented in the business all at once. So I wanted to get your feedback on planning for that disruption. Can you utilize different phases of implementation or a more agile approach to make sure that you're ready for any disruption that might come with current business climates?
Yeah. Well, first of all, in the phasing, the whether we go, sort of phase in technology in bits and pieces, or we do a full blown, more of a big bang approach where we implement the technology all at once. That really comes down to the client's, risk profile and strategy and a bunch of different variables. But it's pretty common that it is actually pretty common that we see phased rollouts, and it's pretty common that that's a better strategy for organizations that want to minimize risk, especially if they're a global organization or have multiple business units, multiple locations, or even if they just have multiple functions that they want to sort of ease into over time. So there's the phasing approach, but then there's agile, which aren't necessarily one and the same, and they don't necessarily align perfectly. Agile, Agile is for as popular as it is right now, it can be a real problem for companies that are going through digital transformations, because oftentimes when you're going through a full-blown transformation and you're trying to rethink your entire business model and the technologies you use, you sort of need that big picture, complete holistic view of what it is you're going to deploy and how you're going to deploy and all that good stuff. Whereas Agile is more focused on, let's not worry about over defining the stuff up front or over defining the processes and requirements up front, knowing that we're just going to put technology out there, poke holes in it, and let the technology evolve to fit our needs. That can be okay when you're going to deploy the technology, but from a strategic and a planning and a design perspective, it's still important to have that upfront, sort of more that waterfall mentality to how you define the vision and the requirements and the business processes upfront. And then when you go deploy it, if you do deploy it in bits and pieces or more of a piecemeal phased approach, so you can certainly use some components of Agile within that. So I think it's really a hybrid, where you sort of have to know how to pick and choose what strategies or approaches and methodologies are going to make sense for you, knowing that there's not necessarily just an either or answer. It could be a combination or a hybrid of multiple approaches.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
And our next guest is a really interesting one, someone who's been on the show before in the past, who's been on talking about change management in a number of different perspectives. And today we're going to have her on. We're going to play a clip of Kyler interviewing Theresa Richardson from Third Stage Consulting, talking about social awareness and company culture. So let's cut it over to you, Kyler.
Today, we are having a very interesting and relevant conversation with our change practitioner and business culture expert, Theresa Richardson, about social awareness and company culture. So, first of all, thank you for joining me today, Theresa. Always great to have you.
Absolutely. I'm very excited to be here and talk about the intangibles that really impact the tangible. So,
Absolutely. So important and so relevant, kind of in the current climate that we have just around social awareness and current events. So, with that, I'd love to know where everyone is joining us from today. So if you could just go ahead and put where you're located in the chat. We are live on all social channels, so LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and then also we can see all of your comments. So feel free to interject with any questions you might have for Theresa, or any thoughts that you have regarding the conversation. So with that, let's jump in. Theresa, I just kind of want to start with a baseline of how important is it for a company leadership team, executive team to just take into consideration current events, whether it's culturally, socioeconomically, all of those types of things, to really understand what the experience is, both personally and professionally, for their workforce?
sure. So, over the last several years, I think we have been painfully aware of the impact of current events or policies, or even more specifically, global events, to how that impacts our work. We always don't have enough time because we're running so quickly to really address these things. But I think within the past few years, we've been placed in a position where it came to a grinding halt. So we needed to understand the current workspace, right? So we went from in person to virtual, almost overnight. So how do people interact with that new environment? We went from, seeing people every day to getting emails and being less personable, less interaction, person to person interaction. So understanding how that works is very important, especially, for a company that, it has more relationship type industry needs. So it's very, very important to remember that we're all people. We're still, humans. We still need to interact with each other. And when things change in our environment the way they did, how do we as a company address those issues? So I think it's very, very important to, and I've said this 10,000 and maybe 2 times now, but unless our company is 99.9% automated, we have people that we need to consider when we're changing things or we're making adjustments, or we need to do a 180 on how we conduct business daily. So it's very, very important.
Absolutely. And a lot of people would say, yes, I understand and have an appetite for change management. I understand how that might affect my overall technology implementation or digital transformation project. But many times, especially leaders that become, kind of cold to the personal life of their employees. And I think we've seen a huge shift in just our overall business culture in taking to account things like benefits or remote work or family structure and those types of things. How important are those, we'll call them personal characteristics of an employee to the overall organizational culture?
Well, personally, I think it's hugely important because, prior to this switch, you had a lot of interaction face to face in meetings, but you also had a lot of things like affinity groups or events or some type of sponsored group dynamic that people engaged in with each other. And when that gets removed out of your business or your professional work day or work week or whatever, how are you going to address that moving forward? Because it might not be important to a lot of people, but it's still important to the organization. So you can't just shut it off and expect everyone to continue, doing what we're doing and working, with great joy. You need to understand the entire realm of my business environment. Part of that has to do with, yes, I have a job, but we also have those humanistic, characteristics that we can't forget about. If you want people to do their best and be their best, we have to come to them with any type of questions of, how are we doing? Is there something else we can improve on? Do you still want, like, I know some companies do the Friday virtual coffee chats or what, those are still kind of cool to have, as part of your work week. We're not robots. We are people, and we enjoy social interaction. And in order for us to do our best, we have to be at our best. So how can we be at our best in the new environment? And if you don't understand that, you need to put your finger on the pulse and figure it out. And give us a call. We'll help you out.
Yeah, some emotional intelligence skills are certainly crucial for that. Yeah, it's funny you should mention that. Here at Third Stage, we do have a hybrid working environment. We do have an in-person office that we haven't been to in about 2 years, which is pretty typical for a lot of different workplace experiences. But I've noticed just on like an insecurity side, I'm like awkward now in the office with other people because I don't know, like I forget how like the office banter and the joking used to work. So it definitely has an effect on you, even if you are an extrovert like myself that really thrives in those environments. And so I think that's so important to consider.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about some specific current events here. And I'll just precurse this with, we don't have any political affiliations or, cultural affiliations here at Third Stage. We're just here to talk about how technology can help better our overall business climate. So when we touch on these, there's no opinions there. It's just, a certain understanding of how, as a leadership team and as a technology project team, how do you make sure you identify and are aware of these overall experiences for the employees? So something, that's near and dear to my heart specifically is just the childcare. We being a remote employee and not having a lot of access to childcare, or having schools that are remote learning or those types of things. So as a business leader, Theresa, how would you suggest working through some of those things that are more kind of vulnerable subjects that we typically wouldn't have had, 3 years ago, those types of conversations, but now they're necessary to understand how you can create a productive working culture? So what would be some advice you have for managers or leaders that do have some of their employees going through a really challenging time when it comes to their children?
So for me, it's important to always enlist the help of experts. I don't know how to do everything. That's why I go to an expert. There are people who have specialized skills that can deal with this. A lot of companies have HR departments, and they have, employee resource programs that you can tap into. I think those are probably the most underutilized areas of an organization. It's there when you need it. It's a nice, some people don't really know exactly what encompasses an employee resource group, but they're very helpful. So in terms of leadership, I would tap into the experts. I wouldn't, offer advice or, guidance on something that you weren't trained to handle, because even with, let's compare it to change management, right? So I can understand someone's nonverbal skill or cues to see which way the conversation's going. Someone who doesn't have the type of training that I have, and they don't recognize those signs, even in tone and inflection, that's a huge, huge indicator to me on which way I should go with the conversation. Do I drop it? Do I push a little harder? Do I move forward? So I would say if your company is able to have that type of resource, direct your employees there. I would include that information in like a town hall, or I would have some companies have weekly meetings with departments, or, in certain areas have that information posted. If as a leader, someone comes to you and says, hey, I have an issue, I really want to talk about it, I would just do a little bit of like investigation. What could it possibly be? And if you're not comfortable talking about it, refer them to somebody who's trained to do it. all of the things that are going on right now in the world, yes, you do have to be a leader and be there for your people, but you also have to be a leader and know that I'm not equipped to handle this. So I'm going to support you and direct you to someone who does have the training, because again, there's a lot of things going on, and, dealing with children and dealing with family and dealing with all of these issues. I would like to think everyone has, a certain amount of training or understanding, but not everyone does. And I would rather have that directed to a person who's been trained and has, been through these issues and led groups and conversations so they could really address it the way it needs to be addressed.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a really good piece of advice. I've never personally heard that before, of, bringing in HR experienced or just even more comfortable kind of in that space.
We're going to take a quick break. We're going to continue this conversation right after we come back. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The bad news is if you miss that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to stratosphere2022.com. Go to stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings. And the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 replay. And again, go to stratosphere2022.com and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Bad to the bone. Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 60. We're here with Kyler and Theresa talking about social awareness and company culture.
A lot of times we get feedback that my HR team isn't authentic. They have this script, this talk track that they're supposed to say when it comes to dealing with, human resourcing issues or any sort of employee feedback. How can HR teams really work to understand the overall climate of their culture and authentically care about what the employees' needs are?
Oh, so that's a great question. And, again, I always refer back to, am I qualified enough to deal with this? Like, I think one of the tellings of a leader is, do I have the ability or the training or the composure to deal with this? As a leader, you are a servant leader. You're there to help your people. You're not there for an ego thing, right? So if I don't have the right expertise, or my HR department doesn't have the right expertise, it's my responsibility as a leader of an organization that oversees hundreds or thousands or even 5 people, right? What can I do to help my team? This is not an I thing. This is a we thing. This is a team, a group. Mm-hmm. Business is run by relationships. It's run by people. So if I need to even go outside and get an outside consultant to come in and do the work, that's my responsibility if I want to be a good leader to my people, if I want to be that servant leadership type. So it is not, in my opinion, it's not an ego of, well, I can handle it. I can do that. No, it's, am I equipped to do this properly to serve the people that I have responsibility for? And I think it takes more courage to admit that maybe I don't. So let me go look for it somewhere else, as opposed to try to take on everything and possibly miss an opportunity to help somebody. At the end of the day, we have businesses that are run by and for people. So we can't miss the opportunity to really step up and serve them the way they deserve to be served.
Well said, definitely. And when it comes to making your company more attractive to potential candidates, understanding and being quote unquote woke, if you will, that we talk about a lot, just to things that really matter and motivate the personalities of your workforce. We know right now we're going through this great resignation, great reshuffle, whatever you want to call it. Really, it's the employee that has kind of the power in this situation to choose where they want to go and work. And that's why we've seen a lot of companies invest in, a chief culture officer or something like that that will kind of showcase their overall benefits and value to the employee. So if you were, say, a chief culture officer right now, what would be a few things that you'd be doing to make sure that you were making your organization as valuable and attractive as possible to potential candidates?
So that's a great question. And I just would like to say that I don't see it as like woke or whatever. I know there's a big push to kind of go down that road, but we also have to understand the needs of every individual, not just a certain group or a certain, category or what have you, because if you go too much to that part, you're going to alienate a lot of other people. So what is the balance we need to find? I personally would, again, tag my HR team or some type of consultant to understand the real vibe of my company. What am I missing? What are you looking for to stay here? So that is super important to me because, again, you have hundreds of people working for you. You have to make sure that you're listening to the team, the group. It's not just a onesie twosie or, whatever. It's how can I make my company more attractive and more inclusive? So people are coming to the job every day feeling good about it. I want to feel good about being here. I don't want to be offended. I want to be valued for my work. And I personally, for me, it's how does my company value me, in my opinion? Do they listen to me? Is my contribution valuable? Are they using what I'm recommending? If they're not, do I get a response? Are people being respectful of one another? And I think there is a line, that we also need to make sure we walk, but we have to make sure everyone is included. Everyone has a voice, if it's survey, if it's, a town hall, if it's an affinity group or what have you. So, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been, 40 hours a week. I've been 60 hours a week. I've been Monday through Friday, Monday through Sunday, 12, 18 hours a day. So my point is, we spend a lot of time at work, right? So we have to make sure the work environment is inclusive and comfortable for people to spend the majority of their life there, right? And it's not just this group, it's the team, it's everyone. So I would prefer to focus on the everyone and how can we make everyone feel valued and comfortable and get the best day's work that they're willing to give.
Absolutely. And, just humanizing your overall colleagues. And speaking of humanizing, I can hear your dog barking, and my dogs have like swarmed to my desk and are at like full alert. And that's just, a great manifestation of how working environments truly have transitioned, but people have a life, have dogs, have children, and those things used to be kind of taboo in the professional conversation. But I feel like now we've really gone into this, if you were to find a silver lining in a terrible and very, challenging situation, it would be that, you've humanized the people that you work with.
Yes.
Really created those, I would say, more lasting relationships because you kind of have those shared pain points of just, living and working and just trying to, thrive in where you are. So
interestingly enough, I think the next wave of improvement will be how do I go from virtual to a hybrid model to make everyone, again, enjoy what they're doing, right? Because personally, I love remote work. I really don't want to go back. But I'm just saying, like, how can I really capitalize on what we've learned over the past 2 years and really incorporate that into the next phase of what does my work day look like? What does my work environment look like? You're going to have a lot of people who would love to go back. And then you're going to have a lot of people who just don't want to because, I can't spend time with my dogs. I can take them out to the park. I can, if I had children, I could see my children at lunchtime. If I do have children, but they're way older and one has a daughter. So, how can I, continue that connection or have the benefit of work and home environment to move forward in my career? So I think that's definitely going to be the next wave companies are going to have to contend with. And, if they get to like, you have to come back, a lot of people might be like, I really enjoy what I do. So yes, I am going to give you my resignation. I'm going to look for a job that lets me do this. So that's going to be the next interesting wave.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, that speaking of waves, my next question for you that I was super interested in your feedback is some of the trends kind of mostly in the HR space or in the company culture space that we've seen and talked about on our sister podcast, Transformation Ground Control, which I know you've been on a variety of times, talked about the importance of the very clear line of feedback for employees.
Yes.
And I wondered if you might kind of dig into that and kind of teach us about how we can create that really clear line of, I heard you, I'm listening, thank you for contributing to making our workplace better, that type of thing.
One of my favorite questions, because it's easy to sweep under the rug, and check the box like, oh, yeah, I did the survey, we're good. I think a lot of people miss the mark on that is not showing the result of that information. So if it's, I need 5 ideas to incorporate in the business and I get, let's say 30, I pick 5. Well, you have 25 other people or responses that need to be addressed. Even if it's a, meeting saying, hey, I we had a great turnout. We had 30 responses. We picked the 5. Here they are. Here's the implementation. And then for the rest of the 25, thank you so much. We thought, these were great and possibly we can, use this group at a later time. So we can't do it all, but give an explanation is my point. You can't just drop it and leave it. And then people are like, well, I didn't hear anything back. So why would I participate in the future? So it boils down to, if you're asking me to help you, give me the respect and consideration of giving me an answer, right? So make sure that information is put out to the organization of the people who participated. Make sure people know that, yep, this was great, but we weren't able to do this because of X, Y, and Z. You can't just leave people hanging with no response and expect them to be engaged and want to participate in the future.
That makes a lot of sense.
We're going to take a quick break. We're going to continue this conversation right after we come back. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 60. We're here with Kyler and Theresa talking about social awareness and company culture.
I also wonder, we had a live stream guest, Dr. Christina Serrano, who is a professor up at Colorado State University on our ground control. And I thought of you immediately when she was kind of talking about the psychology of digital transformation. Really fascinating subject. Highly recommend you go check out. It's actually on our YouTube channel, Eric's interview with her. But she talked about the need for the individual to be motivated to change. And that's not something we talk about a ton. We talk about kind of the holistic view of company culture and team dynamic, but she really talked about if that individual doesn't have that overall what's in it for me or understanding of the change, that it just simply cannot happen. And I wondered your feedback to that as a change professional.
Well, I completely agree with her, because even when we look at holistic and team, the team is made up of what? Individuals. Individuals. So, you can't have a team without the collective, and the collective is made up of individuals. So, we've discussed this many, many times as well. It's that you need to tap into that what's in it for me to motivate me. And it's not just, well, what's in it for me? It's making me also aware and asking me to participate in the solution. I know I've used this analogy 10,003 times now, or maybe, 4, but it's like me going into your home and moving everything around without asking your permission, without asking your feedback, and then saying, okay, Kyler, you're good. Go ahead. And you're going to look at me like, what are you talking about? You didn't ask me. You didn't ask me what my issues were. You didn't ask me what I wanted. But now you want me to fully function in this environment that you created. You didn't ask me. We're not going to do this. And you're probably going to rearrange everything back to the way you wanted. So work around. But again, it's like you have to not just look at the team. Yes, the team is made up of people, but you have to look at them being part of the conversation. You have to give them that respect, understanding, acknowledgement of, yes, we understand, we hear you. What are your ideas? I literally just had this conversation the other day with a young lady, and she said, people are the higher ups, she said. They come down here and they make all these changes, and then it doesn't work, and then guess what they do? I said, do they go down to you guys and ask you why it's not working? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, well, it would have made more sense. You'd save on resources, time, investment if you just asked them, included them in the conversation from the start.
Yeah, that certainly is really runs rampant in corporate culture. And to me, that always I grew up in corporate culture before, I left and started to do consulting. So for me, it's always funny of like thinking about like that executive, that came down in like his jeans and cool sneakers and like bought pizza for the team. And it doesn't even know like really what team it is, because it's just that persona, and it goes back to kind of our authenticity. And I highly recommend, if anyone who's on TikTok, if you go find the Gen Zers that make fun of Deloitte and the bigger consulting firms, they're so funny. So if you ever need a good digital transformation laugh, those are great pieces of content. But
yeah, it really always it boggles my mind, but it amuses me at the fact that people put so much time and effort into looking at a problem from their point of view, as opposed to looking at it from the point of view, or getting that point of view from the people who actually do the process. It's to me, it's an issue possibly of ego. Like, oh, I know how to do this. It's on the paper. It says right here, this is how you do it. No, well, time out. Hold on, time out. So, I come from corporate as well, and I used to work for the automotive big three, and the biggest joke would be when some of the engineers would be on their desks and they'd give us a paper and say, go do it. And then, I'd have team leads say, okay, let's figure this out, how it's really going to work. You sit up there and you draw your paper, and then you don't come down here to ask us on the line. You don't include the team, and then you want us to make it work. So, it's little time, and it'll have a great value after.
Absolutely. And I wonder if those organizations that are so really stuck in that standardized, like the executives make the decision, the middle management is in charge of executing that decision. However, we haven't armed them or coached them through how to have these conversations. When I was in the corporate world, I had this manager, and she was brilliant. She was so good at her job, highest performer, but a terrible manager sometimes. And that's the thing, is she just didn't know how to
Yeah.
have these types of conversations.
Mhm.
And if she did, she would have been highly effective, but she
Yeah.
put so much time into being like, the really stoic executives, because that's what she wanted to be,
Yeah.
that she forgot how to humanize her team. And I would always sit there, and I think, Theresa, you and I are a lot alike in just seeing things for what they are, and in these situations of like, why are you doing that? Why are you acting that way? Like that seems so inefficient to me. Like if you just actually listen to what your employees were trying to say to you, wouldn't you think that they would work a lot harder for you?
Yeah.
But it's just kind of one of those things. I wonder if you think that corporate structure will become kind of unraveled with
Yes.
this labor shortage. And just overall employees kind of saying, actually, no, I don't think I'm going to do that anymore. And it's something that we've kind of never experienced on this level and volume.
That's a great topic to discuss, because it kind of wraps into the work environment and the way it's changed in terms of logistics, right? We now have a different mindset. It's more, it went from, okay, now I have to figure out how to survive, to I figured it out and I enjoy it. So what do I need to do to keep the improvement going? One thing I can say for my time within the auto industry is that they recognize some of these issues, and they put a lot of us young managers through training. So how to have difficult conversations with people, how to lead without authority, how to do these different humanistic things, as you stated, to make sure the job get done and you respected your people. Again, like I said, I have a lot of training. I can see, I can hear, I can just feel the room. A lot of companies may not have that level of training, but they should. So again, it's going to be interesting to see the next wave of improvement and how we're going to interact with business, because business is not the same anymore. You don't have, some companies might want to go back to that, good old structure they had before, but I can't see them retaining the top talent. I can't see, the growth and the improvements that you'll get with really super engaged employees who feel valued. So, and again, it's the question of, what does feeling valued mean? It might be different from an affinity group. It might be, X, Y, and Z, but that's the job of leadership. When I was coming up into my career, a lot of the leadership was that traditional sense of leadership. Now you have servant leadership. That's what the goal is. Like, I've had a lot of people continue to want to work for me. And it's not because, I was a leader. It was because I cared and I listened, and I was that servant leader, and I wanted to help people move on in their careers. I wasn't the type of leader that was threatened by someone who had better skills than me or knew more. I would want to encourage it and help it and nourish it and grow. And a lot of people left me because they got promoted, but that's my job as a leader. My job isn't to use their skills to make myself shine. If I want to shine, I need to sharpen my skills. My job is to create an environment where people can thrive and feel valued and get the best possible output my team can have. End of story. And that's what I did. So a lot of companies need to understand, if you want the excellence and the improvements and the growth to make sure your company is moving forward, that's what you're going to need.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about the technology side of things. Recently, in one of our ground control episodes, Eric and I talked about this new emergence of nudge technology, and talking about how it encourages, from more of a psychological standpoint, end users, or those actual frontline employees, to engage with new technology. So it's almost like a bridge the gap to, it's not training so much, it could be a gateway to training, but it's just an understanding of how that could optimize their overall experience. So I wondered if you thought that when we talk about trends, that technology will come with sort of this hybrid caveat of hard technical skills, but also either these big business technologists or even platforms that can speak more like a human being, and what that will look like as far as creating successful projects, I'll say.
So yes, the being in that fourth wave of the industrial revolution right now, so we're intertwining people and technology, and it's not just for a certain group anymore. It's really how do we become more efficient and effective, and it's really coming down to that line, right? That first line person. So I do see a lot of that technology needing to be embraced at that level, and it does need to be more inclusive of that particular area in an organization for it to be effective. So I do see like AI and things like that being more useful and used than not. Prior to, you would look to say, okay, the AI technology or this technology, it's for those engineers only. It's for this group only. Now it's being spread across the whole organization from front line to the top. So absolutely, you're going to have certain technologies, maybe even take away some of that quote unquote non-value added activity that an employee was doing before, so we can free them up to do more valuable tasks. So.
And what would you say? I know we talked about this again with Christina from CSU, to open the door to the workforce of people that might not be hard technical engineer employees, but still having that opportunity in technology, like yourself. Obviously, you're incredibly intelligent and have a great background in business process and all kinds of different technical skills, but you still have that human side, and you might just be a unicorn. I don't know, but
I'm a unicorn.
I think that there's, especially, we even talked to one of the leaders at Lockheed Martin recently, and they talked about their investing in STEM programs, even starting at 6th grade. These kids won't come into the workforce for decades, but they still see from their data that it's so important to do that. And I think one thing we want to do here at Third Stage is teach our audience and just inform our community that you can absolutely be in the technology industry and not be incredibly strong in coding or engineering or those types of things. So I'm just curious as to what you would say for someone that might be considering a career that might not have those skills.
So again, I think this piggybacks nicely off of the beginning of our conversation on how industry has changed. And it's not just our physical environment, it's everything. So, years ago, you could either be a lawyer or you could be a doctor or an engineer. You had very boxed type of careers, right? And you wouldn't traditionally think that a lawyer needs technology or, a writer needs tech or whatever. Now we're moving to become more hybrid, where you will see in the future, everyone is going to need technology. So them going back to the 6th grade or even sooner it's where our future will be, right? Mm-hmm. We have to get to a point where we are introducing these topics or these opportunities to everyone if we want to remain competitive. So if you look at the world, the global scale, it would blow your mind to see when this actually starts or who's using this technology in their businesses. And maybe we are behind and we need to catch up, but we also need to make sure that whatever it is we offer, there is a level of comfort and inclusivity in it. I think a lot of reasons people don't get into this is the fear factor. Mm-hmm. I don't know this, or it's too hard for me, or, X, Y, and Z. So us overcoming that objection and that fear helps to open the doors to more efficiencies, to more opportunities. Again, we have to walk away from this non-value added activity so we can optimize our employees, develop their skills, and become more competitive, not just in our industry, but on a global scale.
I love that you attach that to a competitive advantage. I completely agree in the fact that there is a lot of room for creatives in the technology sphere. And many times that makes whatever technology they're implementing that much easier because that human side was considered within the project plan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, unless your, business is 99.9% automated, people are included in your work structure, your organizational structure. That's just the way it is. So, if we are introducing a technology or an opportunity and we evaluate our work stream and say, okay, we're at, 80% efficiency, we have 20% non-value added work. Can you imagine the impact our teams or our product or our business would have if we were able to reduce that 20% to 10 and then make our, have more value added activities and make our employees feel more, useful and energetic about their jobs, and just be like, hey, I have an idea. Like, the moment you have silence is the moment you need to worry. Seriously. If I give you 10,000 crazy ideas, at least I'm willing to give you 10,000 crazy ideas. 5 might work, whatever, but at least you have them. And if I get to the point where, I'm just not going to give you any more of my ideas, you have a problem. So how can we expand on creating this value added, environment for our employees to thrive and to produce and to be happy and just to become the best versions of what they want to be in our company?
That's well said. That complacency, that really can be the toxic trait of
It is.
what will take you down as an organization. And, silence is deadly. As a mom of 2 toddlers, when it's silent, there is something critically wrong.
Yeah.
And
And honestly, that's where you get this great resignation, right?
mm-hmm.
You have people who are feeling, hey, you don't want to listen to me. You don't want to capitalize on my ideas. I'm trying to help. You don't want to help. Okay, I'm going to go somewhere else who will. And I'm going to probably find a better job with better pay and a better environment, et cetera, et cetera. And then what did you lose? You lost experience. You lost part of the team, which even if, like, let's just say me in an organization, if I left, that is part of the team that you just lost.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you going to backfill that? You got to interview, you got to stress other employees out, you got to spend time and money on, training. There's a lot of intangibles when that happens, but it has a real world impact to your ROI, to your team environment, to your business as a whole. So, you need to have that servant leadership mindset to really look at everything that's going on. It's not just, okay, I'm not going to listen to Theresa's ideas because I'm busy. It's like, okay, well, now she's gone. Now she's, not part of that team. Now I have to overburden the other people now. So there's a lot of factors that go on in those decisions that a true leader will consider before making some of those choices.
Absolutely. And something I know you talk about a lot that you touched on there was just overall purpose.
Yes.
And it seems as though that is really the thesis to, lowering attrition, to making sure your employees do feel content and satisfied within their workspace, but also within a digital transformation project. If nobody understands why they're doing that,
Yep.
then it's certainly not a huge motivator to, really push to be successful.
We're going to take a quick break. We're going to continue this conversation right after we come back. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 60. We're here with Tyler and Theresa talking about social awareness and company culture.
And honestly, when you look at what we're talking about and what we're proposing, it boils down to being a decent human being.
Mm-hmm.
Like, business aside, it'll be there tomorrow. Like, people are involved in what we're doing. I'm not going to go to a job and spend time away from my husband and my family to spend time away from my husband and my family. I'm there for a reason, and I need to find purpose, and I need to make sure that I feel valued, because if I'm not feeling valued and my ideas are important, I'm not part of the solution, what am I here for? Like, what am I doing? So those things need to be considered when you're looking at a digital transformation. You want to make sure that it's not only the nuts and bolts, but it's the other pieces of inclusivity, and do people understand, and what are their questions, and et cetera, that you need to contend with. Otherwise, you know what? Your adoption and user rates probably won't be that high. You'll have a technology that has a pretty bow on it that just spent $500 million. It's there. So what's the point?
Yeah, it's completely irrelevant if it's not getting used. It's, that technical debt that we talk a lot about, because that plan and understanding the overall end game, if you will, of what that's actually going to look like for the user and that experience. And in our last few minutes here, Theresa, I want to ask you a difficult question. When it comes to, I know, but I know you're up for the challenge. Okay. Within the world right now, no matter where you're located, obviously we have a global audience. We have a global client community here at Third Stage. So we are very good at kind of chameleon into different organizations and understanding what our role there is. Since we are in just such a social divisive time, it's a really difficult time to be a leader within an organization where you might have different political ideations. You might have different cultural nuances. You might have someone who's really affected by COVID-19 and someone who thinks that it's a hoax, and those different, very polarizing views. How, as a business leader, do you respect people's opinions but still try and unite under a term of collective values as a business, outside of all of the different noise just in our current climate right now?
So, boy, you really laid on me, didn't you, sister?
I waited till the end so you wouldn't hang up on me. No.
No, I think it's important. I think that, again, when companies gravitate too far each way, you're going to miss a side. You're going to miss a side, right? So, if I believe strongly one way and my coworker strongly believes another way, there has to be something in the middle that we can decide on, right? There has to be some type of accommodation and accountability and explanation behind the decisions I'm making. So if I don't look at the whole picture and saying, okay, Theresa wants this, Kyler wants this, how can we come to the middle to say we can work on this together as a group to satisfy the needs for our clients? Like, we need to take a consideration into the clients as well. What are we selling? What are we producing? What service are we providing? At the end of the day, if an organization doesn't produce a certain X, Y, or Z, no one gets paid. So how do we collectively hear each other, respect each other's opinions, and come to a consensus where we can move forward? So I honestly believe having those difficult conversations up front and really listening to everyone and having the dialogue and the conversation is the hard work. Once we get to the point of, okay, we've decided to do this, this is why. These accommodations are for this side, these accommodations are for this side, and this is where in the middle we're going to meet as a team together so we can move forward as an organization. Until we do that, then we're really not going to go anywhere. We're really not. So if the need to have some type of an affinity group or an HR person or somebody comes in, that tells me you're listening to me, Kyler. If I say, I don't feel valued and I got this and then you just come to me, well, let's talk about it. Well, are you equipped to talk to me about this? Or are you providing me with a resource so I can come to a decision and make a conclusion so we can move forward? There's certain steps that you have to make in order for us to move forward. And if you skip those steps, you're in trouble. So.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on something that's so important, is just that those subculture purpose and values. For example, where I live right now, we are in this huge turmoil within our public school district. There's the flipping of the board, the leadership has completely changed, and it's a really point of contention for our community. However, when I walk into my son's preschool class, that all dissolves away, because no matter if that parent agrees with me or agrees with someone else, or we're completely on opposite sides of the road here, we still have a shared purpose of the safety of our children. And I think that's something that it scales to what you were saying in the community. We have a shared purpose of getting paid, of being successful, of making change in our industry. And I think that's, the key to that.
Well, let me just say this. Like, every organization has its culture. It has its systems and structures, right? And we all want to be part of it and inclusive. But we can't forget we have a competitor next door.
Yeah, very good point.
So if we're fighting internally and, this and that, our competitor could snatch up our contract. They could snatch up our clients. They could snatch. So, while we're doing all of this and someone takes, my lunch, I'm not going to eat. So it boils down to, what do we need to do as a collective to move forward to meet the needs of our clients or our consumers or, whatever, because at the end of the day, we are at work to produce or to provide something.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think that this, having that purpose around what you provide is kind of, what you're definitely saying here, and just having that just overlay of respect within not only the leadership hierarchy, but within your peer network group too.
Absolutely. Because although we are at work and we do need to find, a balance and respect each other, at the end of the day, we're there to make money and to provide a service. If we can't do that, our competitors, locally, nationally, even globally, will take our lunch. And then what is the purpose of being in an organization with no business?
Absolutely. All such great insight. I highly recommend, if you haven't checked out Theresa's keynote from our recent Digital Stratosphere event, you can go to digitalstratosphere.2022.com and see that replay. It's also on our YouTube page, which a lot of you are streaming from right now. But Theresa, this is such great advice, and we so appreciate your time and your insight and your vulnerability of just having these conversations to create a better working culture for our client community.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Okay, thank you, Theresa and Kyler. Great conversation, really interesting stuff. I have a few thoughts on this topic here. When we come back, we're going to first take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 60. My name is Eric Kimberling. We just had Theresa Richardson and Kyler on the show talking about social awareness and company culture. And I think this is a really interesting topic. And again, sort of shifting gears from the technology stuff that we talked about earlier in the podcast, where we were talking about AI and digitization of some core fundamental business processes and use cases of business scenarios. But here we're talking about something a little bit more intangible, I guess you'd say. It's something that's harder to touch and feel. It's something that is really important to any sort of transformation. And it's also important to just any sort of organization in terms of leadership and organizational development and just organizational performance. Really focusing on that culture and understanding what kind of culture it is you have today, where you're headed in the future. That's something that so many organizations forget about or lose sight of in general. across the board, but especially when they're going through digital transformations. It's something that we tend to really lose sight of. And you kind of think back to the conversation we were having in the opening segments, where we're talking about some of those hot topics about artificial intelligence and the use of data in aerospace and defense and things of that nature. And it can get really easy to get enamored with all these different technologies and to really get fixated on technology and really looking at all the different ways you could use this cool new technology and all the different things that the technology can do to make our business and our organization more effective. But then we lose sight of this organizational cultural piece of things. We lose sight of the social awareness, all the stuff that Kyler and Theresa were just talking about. And that's really unfortunate, because that's really, in my opinion, the sort of the secret sauce or the glue that brings a digital transformation together. You have all these pieces out there, these pieces of technologies, you have the pieces of data, you have the pieces of business processes and potential future state operational improvements. But none of that really comes together without the glue of organizational culture. And that's really that piece that's so important yet overlooked. And again, the reason it's so hard for organizations and humans to understand why change management is so important is for a couple of reasons. One is because that, like I mentioned before, you can't see it, touch it, or feel it. So you can see and touch the technology. You can see and touch the solution architecture diagrams that show how the systems are going to tie together. You can even see your business processes, because you can map that out. You can put together a process flow, and you can see it. You can walk out to your shop floor or out to your warehouse or out to your office space and see how people are performing their business processes and their workflows, but you can't see and touch and feel culture in the same way. And that's one of the biggest challenges with organizational culture, and one of the biggest reasons why organizations overlook it. But one of the other things I want to mention too, one of the other reasons why so many organizations overlook organizational culture is they think that their culture is fine the way it is. And oftentimes they think that they don't need to worry too much about the organizational change management, because they feel like early in the transformation, they have this feeling of momentum and excitement and buy-in and support for the project. So in other words, most organizations we work with, they understand that our systems are broken, we're inefficient, we could be operating a lot better, we need to upgrade our technologies, we need to do business differently. Most organizations we work with have sort of rallied the troops behind that vision and behind that common understanding that we need to change, we need to improve things. And so that's good news in the organizations we work with. But the bad news is it creates this false sense of security, or this false expectation that change management therefore is going to be easy, because we've rallied the troops, everyone's supportive of this change, people understand in general why the transformation is so important. But what they inevitably find when they get into the implementation, and once you start actually deploying some of these changes, is that change management is going to be really difficult. You have this unintentional resistance that ends up creeping up below the surface. People start to feel threatened. They feel like their sense of worth is at stake or at risk. Not because anyone's telling them they're not doing a good job or they're not going to be important in the future. That's usually not it. It's usually because of some unspoken issues that arise during the implementation. And when I say issues, I mean from the perspective of an employee, it's an issue. So I'll give you an example. If I'm a long-term employee, I've been at your company now for, say, 20 years. I'm a veteran. I've been doing this job since I got out of college. I've built my career in this organization. I've actually added a tremendous amount of value at the organization over the years, let's just assume. And part of that value has been to create new processes. I've created spreadsheets that I've used to manage all these different processes. I've created a tremendous amount of tribal knowledge in my head that no one else has, or is very difficult to replicate because I've been here for 20 years. And that's all good stuff, right? I mean, I've been a key part of the success of the organization. So that's not in question. No one's questioning my contributions to the organization. But now when I cast my mind forward, I start to understand how this organization is going to look going forward. It's going to look quite a bit different. And typically it's going to look quite a bit different in a way that is going to threaten all that stuff that I take pride in, all that stuff that I've done over the last 20 years, the spreadsheets I've created, the tribal knowledge I've amassed, all the relationships that I've built that are so critical to me doing my job, all the processes and workflows that I've created. Now all of a sudden you're sort of taking that away from me. You're not trying to. It's not intentional. No one's doing this for ill-willed purposes or for negative reasons, but it's just part of the transformation. Now you're telling me that everything is going to sort of become centralized. You're going to automate part of my job. You're going to take away that spreadsheet. You're going to become less dependent on my tribal knowledge because now everything's sort of centralized in a core enterprise technology system, let's say. And that dynamic right there is what creates my resistance to change. Now my job's at stake. My whole self-worth is at stake. This is all I know. I've been at this company for 20 years, and now you're taking that away from me. So yes, on one hand, I'm completely supportive of this organization. I'm completely supportive of the idea of transformation, the idea of upgrading technologies, but now it's getting super personal. Now you're taking that stuff away from me, and that's what's going to cause me to maybe not flat out sabotage the project, but I'm suddenly not quite as excited about this. And I'm going to dig in my heels a little bit just as it relates to me to sort of protect and preserve some of that value that I feel like I've created over the years. So that's just one sort of unpacked micro example of how just one person within an organization can resist change. You multiply that one person times however many hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of employees your organization might have, and you can suddenly see how resistance to change can get out of control really quickly, and it can overwhelm a transformation team that is outnumbered by people that are now resisting change. And so that's why change management is so important. And getting back to this whole concept of culture, that's why the culture is so important too. We've got to have that clear culture, that clear, deliberate approach to what our culture is today and what we want that culture to be in the future. And we want to have that clear vision and a clear path for how we're going to move from where we are today to where we're headed in the future. And again, most organizations overlook this. They don't think about culture, and culture can completely undermine a project or it can enable it. If you focus on a culture that's going to enable transformation, then it can enable it. On the flip side, on the inverse side or the vice versa side of it, that transformation itself can also affect your culture. And you want to make sure that that doesn't just accidentally happen to your organization. So in other words, if you're implementing new technologies, and let's just use an example here. I'll use kind of an extreme example to paint the picture. Let's just say I'm an entrepreneurial organization, or I'm part of a team that's within an entrepreneurial organization. We value flexibility. We value being nimble, all that good stuff. And now we're putting in new technology that's very rigid. It's meant to standardize processes. It's meant to create sort of common, repeatable business processes. Sounds reasonable enough. There might be a really good business reason to do that. And a lot of organizations do find that there's a really good reason to do that. But now we've unintentionally created potentially a shock to the system, a shock to our culture, because our culture was historically very flexible, entrepreneurial, nimble. Now all of a sudden we're introducing rigidity and standardization and structure that, again, may be the right business answer, but you can't just expect that to flip overnight. And instead of enabling a culture of more maturity and more structure and more repeatability and efficiency or whatever it is you're driving, now all of a sudden you've created even more resistance because it's been a shock to the system. It's too much of a cultural change, and you haven't thought enough about culture and how you're going to enable that culture you're trying to get to, and you're sort of hoping or ignoring it to the point where you think it's just going to happen. And when you do that, oftentimes what happens is the culture of your organization will reject what it is you're trying to do from a digital transformation perspective. So, those are just some examples of how change management, organizational culture can be so powerful and such a key enabler of transformation. But when you don't do it and you don't do it well, and by the way, most organizations, most teams don't do it well, it can actually be really powerful, but in a really negative way. It can actually completely derail your entire transformation. And hopefully those couple of examples there have sort of painted a simplified picture of how that might be. So really good conversation. I enjoyed that discussion we had with Theresa talking about social awareness, company culture, all that stuff's really important. And in fact, it's so important that we wanted to take it one step further in this episode and talk more about the people side of it. Last week's episode, by the way, just as a side note, we had, and Kyler mentioned this earlier in today's episode, we had Dr. Christina Serrano on the show, who talked about sort of the psychology, I'd call it, psychology and the neuroscience of change and transformation in general. And so I'm really fascinated by this topic because there's so many nuances to it. And so we really wanted to unpack it even more this episode with Theresa and Kyler, as we just did, but also our next guest, who is Jedd Hafer, who's been on the show before. And he's been on the show. I've interviewed him before talking about emotional intelligence. If you go back to one of our earlier episodes, I think it was sometime over the summer, somewhere in maybe the 30s or the 40s, episode number 30s or 40s. You'll see an episode that focused on emotional intelligence with Jedd Hafer. And he's going to be back on the show today, but he's actually going to go even deeper into this concept of emotional intelligence in a more sort of a structured discussion in terms of a presentation that he gave at our Digital Stratosphere event a few weeks ago, which was an online virtual conference all about digital transformation and change management, data, program management, process improvement, anything you can imagine related to digital transformation. We covered it in that 3-day event. There was about 16 hours of sessions throughout the 3 days, and you can actually go stream any or all of those sessions by going to Stratosphere2022.com, and you can register to on demand. Just go watch it right away. You just enter your name, email address, and you'll get a link to get immediate access to those sessions. Well, one of the sessions we're actually going to play for you in this podcast, and that was the topic of emotional intelligence. That's with Jedd Hafer, and we're going to get to that session here after we take a quick break. But first, we'll take a quick break, a quick time out here, and we'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The bad news is if you miss that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to Stratosphere2022.com. Go to Stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings. And the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 replay. And again, go to Stratosphere2022.com. and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Hello, and welcome back to Transformation Ground Controlled, episode number 60. You can find new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, as well as all the audio podcast platforms. This is the podcast, of course, talks about digital transformation, the strategy, people, process, and technology sides of change. And speaking of the people side of change, our next guest is Jedd Hafer, who's an emotional intelligence expert. He's been on the show before. I think he's been on twice before. This will be his third time on. But this time, a little bit different discussion, similar topic, similar focus, but a little bit, we're going to go a little deeper and a little bit more formalized in the discussion here, just to kind of let him present the whole concept of emotional intelligence and really walk through the framework that he has and sort of his experience with the topic of emotional intelligence. And the reason I like talking to Jedd so much, and I'm finding this more and more in my career, by the way, in digital transformation, is that the more I can look outside the immediate world of technology and the immediate world of digital transformation and consulting, all the stuff that I've sort of been in my entire career, I'm finding that there's so much to learn. There's so much cross-discipline sort of lessons that we can bring back to digital transformation. And just as a total side note or soapbox topic here, I think that's one of the problems with digital transformation is we get so myopically focused on our world of technology and consulting as it exists today. Even though the technology is changing, we're evolving, we're getting huge advancements in technologies, we're not making huge advancements in the other more important parts of transformation and change. The things like change management, process improvement, the overall digital strategies, how we deal with people and human behavior. None of that stuff has materially changed over the last couple of decades that I've been doing this. And so that's why I love looking outside our immediate world to other disciplines that we can take lessons from and bring back to digital transformations and make them more successful. And Jedd's a really good example of this. He's someone that is not a techie. He's not a consultant, or at least not a tech consultant in the way that many of you might see me or others from the Third Stage team. He is, however, an emotional intelligence expert, and a lot of his background comes from working with children and at schools and consulting to schools on how they can improve performance for primary education, secondary education, and whatnot. And so on the surface, that sounds completely unrelated to digital transformation. But what I love about talking to Jedd, and where I think there's huge nuggets of value in what he has to say as it relates to digital transformation, is he's dealing with a lot more, I don't want to call it life and death situations necessarily, although sometimes it is life and death situations when you're dealing with schools and kids and their well-being. Of course, there are life and death situations related to that. But I'd say the stakes are a lot higher. I think that's something we can all agree on, even if it's not life and death. The stakes are higher when we're talking about the development of kids, the education of kids, who they're going to be as humans and as adults in the future, how they're going to contribute to society, or what their role is going to be in society. Those stakes are a lot higher than an organization that is sort of limited to just their own little ecosystem, in terms of whether they succeed or fail. The stakes aren't quite as high. The stakes are very high to the people within the organization and maybe their customers and key stakeholders. But in general, maybe the stakes aren't quite as high for a lot of organizations. And so if we look at the way he views emotional intelligence and listen to this presentation he has, I think there's a lot there that's super relevant to any sort of change, any sort of transformation, any sort of shifting of the needle or bending the needle to try and move the needle a certain direction as it relates to our organization, our culture, our strategy, our operations, all that good stuff. So all that being said, let's listen into this conversation or this presentation that Jedd had from his keynote presentation at the Digital Stratosphere conference earlier this year. And again, if you want to listen to this and all the other sessions that we presented from a bunch of different speakers during that event, you can go to stratosphere2022.com and listen out on that. So all that being said, let's jump to the presentation from Jedd Hafer talking about emotional intelligence and change.
The big idea here is to turn up our emotional intelligence wherever it's at. We want to turn that dial and turn it up for whoever's watching. And I'm going to try to give you the most simple overview of the things that I focus on when I'm trying to help individuals or organizations turn up their emotional intelligence. And the big idea that we start with is that there's a decision ahead of time. But before I even have an interaction, I want to decide ahead of time how I want to be. This is what a lot of successful sports teams do. My son is a United States Marine. They always go in with a plan, right? And as a matter of fact, they have about 4 or 5 different backup plans if that plan, something goes awry. With human beings, sometimes we think we're just going to be there and be reactive and sort of hang back and see what happens. The most emotionally intelligent people that I know and the most successful people at having positive interactions with other human beings are the ones who decide ahead of time, this is how I'm going to be. And it might be a good idea to even scribble some thoughts down. How do I want to present to the other human beings that I'm interacting with, however that is? And we'll hear things like, I want to be respectful. No matter what, I want to stay respectful. I want to stay empathetic, particularly if we're going through a crisis. Empathy is one of those skills. And working for the Love and Logic Institute, I never thought of empathy as a skill. I thought of it as just something you either feel or you don't feel. But it turns out the conveying of sincere empathy is a really powerful skill, making people feel important and heard and valued, and especially if they're in pain, that we're rejoicing when they rejoice and we're mourning when they mourn. We're feeling it with them. And that validation of those feelings, really great thing for especially leaders and people who lead teams to be able to do. Too many times when we get our feelings hurt, part of the feeling is they didn't consider me. They didn't consider my feelings. So we're considering the other parties, the other party or parties ahead of time before we even start that interaction. And then we move. I say start with self-awareness. That's really not true. We've already started with the decision. The next step is self-awareness. Me. What's going on with me? Am I hangry today? Am I tired? Am I in a bad mood? And I always recommend for interpersonal relationship stuff. Talk to a lot of parents. Let's not have these important discussions when one of us is tired, hungry, upset about something else. It's tough for parents because sometimes we don't have as much control over that timing as we would like. If I'm a boss, hopefully I do.
Right.
When am I going to have this conversation that might be difficult? I want to make sure that I'm in a good space. I want to make sure that I have my thoughts together. That if nothing else, I'm not upset about something else. So many times when I deal with an upset person, I realize it's something that happened some other time and in some other place and involves some other person. And that's the wrath that I'm getting from this person right now. It doesn't even have a whole lot to do with me. Or at least I like to think that way.
Yeah, and I'll just add too, when we talk about that empathy, we learned that in our cultural keynote yesterday and from our business process, that we look at across the aisle within business and have that ability to come together in communication, to have empathy for, oh, this system is really hard for this person in accounting versus the experience of the person in marketing, because obviously that's my favorite department, as I said yesterday. But I think that empathy is really, really valuable to understand, especially when implementing a new technology and understanding the pain points of business processes.
And when we talk about empathy as a skill, we have to make sure that we're sincere there. The worst thing in the world is insincere empathy. When someone says, I know just how you feel. No, you don't. It's actually the effort that we take to put ourselves in that other person's shoes. So I know just how you feel is the worst thing to say if I'm trying to convey empathy. What I might say instead is something like, help me understand. I want to make sure I understand. It's the effort that we take to put ourselves in those shoes. My grandma used to say, before you judge somebody, you should walk a mile in their shoes.
Yeah.
Because if they're mad at you for judging them, you've got a mile head start on them and you've got their shoes. So she was a smart lady. Yeah. She was a smart lady. Next, we will talk about staying interested in that other person. So again, emotionally intelligent people are able to make the other party feel I'm interested in you. And in this age, unfortunately, we make the joke that we're often left to our own devices. You know what kind of devices? Right? So too many times I'm actually doing the opposite. I'm saying, yeah, I'm listening to you. And I'm sending a message that says, I'm not interested in you. With parents again, and I teach this to teachers and anybody who works with people, to do the exact opposite, to have something that you're focused on. And then when it's time to talk to that person, you actually put that thing away. I had a boss who did this. This is back in the olden days. My office was just down the hall from her. And she was basically like the principal of the school. So when kids came to see her, she'd have her door open and she would call me when kids were on the way, just so she could hang up on me, right? She would call my office phone 20 feet away. And as soon as the kids showed up in her doorway, she'd say, oh, a really important conversation I have to have. And she would hang up on me and she would turn and she would make that kid feel like the most important person in the world. She was that level of intentional. Of course, it was terrible for my self-esteem, but it was great for the kids in terms of making them feel important. Absolutely. And so that's just a little trick. If people feel like you don't ever listen to them, if you've ever gotten that complaint from a friend or a spouse or coworker, do the opposite of what most people do. Is you start talking and I start looking at my device. Be on the device. That's easy. Most of us can do that one. And then put it away and physically turn and engage that person so that you're not just interested, but you're showing the interest. And so many times I'm like, well, I can do this. I can multitask. But to how we make that person feel, again, there's an intentionality. All your audience is used to hearing me say, intentionality wins the day. That's a level of intentionality most people don't have. I'm going to have this thing. And back in the day with my boss, she would be scribbling on something. And if I came to talk to her, she would put it down, she would put it away, and she would physically turn to lock her eyes on me. And again, I always felt like the most important person or part of her day.
Absolutely. And when we talk about this interest, when it comes to digital transformation, we talk a lot about that contract, right, between the sponsor and the end user, and how we know that user adoption, at the end of the day, if your people aren't using that technology, that's affecting things like ROI. that's affecting revenue. And if you are not, as a leader or a change practitioner, interested in their overall experience for software selection, for understanding any pain points within this new technology, or even understanding any fear built around new technologies, automation, then if you're not totally interested in that conversation, their value level within the organization really decreases. And that's when we start to see really rippling effects within the overall business infrastructure.
Such a good point. And here's another little tip. Never go on and talk about emotional intelligence with someone who's better at it than you. That's always embarrassing. If you've ever been, and we were just talking about AI and things, if you've ever been on you've gotten a hold message, and it's a robot voice saying, your call is important to us, right? Your call is important to us. And how important do you actually feel a lot of times? And again, some of this hits close to home because I've worked for businesses and we had some kind of a message like that. I want to make people feel basically the opposite. Anything that's ever made you feel unimportant, like whether you're the end user or not, if it's made you feel like, yeah, we're just rushing over your importance very quickly, we want to do the opposite. And a lot of times it's that extra time, that extra second. If I'm listening to a conversation, it's that extra beat. Instead of quickly chiming in my thoughts that I've been thinking about, I'm going to blurt this out the first moment of dead air I get. That extra beat that says, I'm really listening, I'm really absorbing this stuff. And even that could be a very intentional thing. In a meeting or in a conversation or on a Zoom, before I blurt out my answer, I'm going to take that one extra beat, that one extra second, and then really there's a thoughtfulness to my answers rather than just, oh, this is what I was thinking while you were talking.
Right, absolutely. And we talked yesterday about that recent video I did that said stop saying automation. Because when you go into a manufacturing floor that it employs 50 people and you start saying, I'm going to automate this, I'm going to automate that. And the people that's their job. That's what they do on a day-to-day basis. And you're not being intentional as a business leader to say, even though that's going to be automated, Jedd, this is the A, B, and C, D role you're going to move into and the opportunity to expand your value within the business.
Yeah, we don't want to speed right past the person aspect and how we make those people feel. It's a perfect example of, if I'm around people and I'm talking about all the systems that are going to do all the things that we need done, and I completely pass right by the people aspect, how are those people going to feel? Even if, and many times it's pretty exciting. I mean, I've worked with companies where they worry, oh, I'm going to lose my job because I don't know how to do this thing, and now they have technology that's going to do this thing. And it turns out, no, they have a new role and they love it. And it's so much more stress-free, or maybe not stress-free, but it's less stress. And all that anxiety, we'll talk a little bit later about, I have some thoughts on anxiety, especially when we're going through change. All that anxiety was unwarranted. But if I'm the person delivering the message, whether I'm a leader or not, if I'm delivering a message, I want to be cognizant of how I'm making the other person feel, because we remember how things make us feel. Right? We remember how people make us feel. There's restaurants with really good food that I won't go back to because of how they made me feel. There's also places with average coffee that I can't wait to go to because of how they make me feel like the most important customer they've ever had.
Absolutely. And that customer impact is really what we're going for in a digital transformation, to view ROI or anything like that. So if you do have feedback or experience, I know we have a lot of HR professionals, change practitioners, a lot of people within this community. We definitely want to have that collaborative conversation. So we're going to go through a few slides here, and then I'd love to hear from you in the comments and give Jedd, who's our emotional intelligence expert, works with this all over the entire country with here in the States. So definitely a great opportunity to ask some change questions.
Let's look at that.
Okay, really interesting conversation. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll pick this up when we come back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Relax, don't do it when you want to go to it. Relax, don't do it when you want to come. Relax.
Hello, and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 60. You can find new episodes every Wednesday. We're in the midst of a presentation from Jedd Hafer talking about emotional intelligence and change. Let's jump back to it.
And once again, we're deciding all of this ahead of time. And this is just two examples of, and then again, I've seen this with the most, who I deem as the most successful communicators when it comes to emotional intelligence. There's a couple things that they definitely do. And one is, if you've ever been maybe listened to a speech by a politician and they turned you off in about 2 seconds, a lot of times it's a lack of authenticity. You're saying, you don't really mean this, you don't really believe this, you're trying to tell me what I want to hear. Salespeople are notorious for this, right? Salespeople are notorious for things that sound too much like a technique. You know, Kyler, when I was Kyler, and Kyler, and it's like, oh, they've gotten the mention of my name 6 times, and that, and they learned that in some seminar. You can just tell. And as human beings, we actually don't like it when people use techniques on us. As we sit here talking about skills that are going to make us better at this, it's okay, I think, to use skills in terms of, I'm not going to just wait and see how it goes. I'm going to be more intentional. At the same time, I do not want to come across as that insincere, fake, technique-y. And I've worked with people like this too. They put their work voice on, and they use some of their work terms, and you're not really like that. So ahead of time, I'm going to decide to be authentic. And again, I think this is for leaders, but it's for anybody. And I'm going to have respectful engagement. I'm going to have respectful communication. And usually we do better when we make a commitment with ourselves that we're going to do that ahead of time. We don't do as well in the heat of the moment going, oh yeah, be respectful, right? I've got to decide ahead of time. This is where I'm going to be. And as Eric and I talked about the weather, we are kind of making the weather then a little bit. We're sort of setting the tone. And it's amazing how often a conversation that may have been a difficult conversation can stay respectful because one person set the pace for that conversation.
Absolutely. And I know Sam over here is saying, a useful reminder is ERP is not computers, it's a people system. And that's so true. And especially when we talk about our vendor partners and the authenticity within that sales process and that professional skepticism that Eric talked about this morning, and just understanding the authenticity that goes into that process and asking those right questions and communicating with your front lines. What are the processes that we need to be able to, integrate within this system authentically? Not, we're getting a new system and it's going to be the best thing on earth. We're going through a change to benefit the business. So thank you, Sam, for that comment. That's a great one.
And to benefit humanity, hopefully, we'll have a bigger benefit. What a great quote. ERP is not a computer system. It's a people system that just happens to run on computers. I love the way Sam says it. I might steal that if it's okay.
Yeah, well,
I guess if he says it's okay, then it's not stealing.
Yeah. Sam is a guest blogger for us and a great partner, and we're going to need you to put that in Spanish, as we always need you to do, Sam, because we're in Spain. So I
could try. My Spanish is rudimentary, but I would probably blow it. But that's just what a great quote. It's the tools that we use change over time. We're literally doing things now that we used to do with sticks, right? But we're still human beings working toward a goal, and no matter what the company is, the company's still made up of people. He says it's free.
Always a consultant.
But we can pay if we wish. Yeah, that's thinking like a consultant. That's thinking like a good consultant.
Exactly.
So the other thing we're deciding ahead of time is how we're going to listen. We're going to take, and this takes effort. This is bad. I mean, you're a parent, you know this. It takes effort to listen to my kids. Sometimes I feel like I spend too much time listening to them, but to make them feel heard is, again, we're meeting powerful human needs. So this gets down to like base needs that all people have, you know, food, water, shelter, Netflix, you know, just the basic things that we survive on. Being heard is actually a powerful human need. Having our voice reach someone, it's literally a need. We can absolutely drive ourselves mad if we don't feel like anyone hears us. And if you think about the need to be noticed or the need to be heard, how powerful is that in social media?
Absolutely, sure.
Many people get on Facebook and the whole thing is, I want everybody to hear my voice or, you know, see my cat or whatever it is. So we make a decision ahead of time that we're going to meet this powerful human need that people have to be heard and to feel validated, to feel important, feel significant. We're going to meet it and we decide ahead of time, I'm going to tune in and I'm not just going to listen to understand. There's the whole paraphrasing thing.
Yeah.
I've seen this and I've worked with a lot of therapists.
Sure.
So, wait, don't take that the wrong way. I've worked professionally with a lot of therapists. They have the temptation is to parrot back what the person just said. I hear you saying the temptation is to parrot back what the person just said. That's a terrible way to make someone feel heard. It is much better if I can paraphrase. I've pulled out the meaning. Oh, so you're saying it's really important as human beings that we feel heard. Paraphrase instead of parrot. So that's the listen to understand part. But even more important, what do people remember? How we make them feel. We are listening. And by the way, does listening occur over email? Yes, I know some terrible listeners, meaning I sent them an email. I asked 2 really specific questions, and they kind of answered one. I'm sure this has never happened to anyone else. They kind of answered one of the questions, completely ignored the other question, or just chose not to answer. More likely, they read it really fast, and they didn't, just like a good listener, sift through and see what the meaning is. And I'm trying to determine what's important to the asker, right? What's important to them, and make sure that I, if I can, make them feel understood and give them the answer. On top of that, sometimes we're just venting, right? As human beings, we're just venting. And it's pretty important. This is pretty important in relationships. Make that person feel heard, feel understood. We're going to remember how they made us feel.
Absolutely. And we talk about this with our change practitioners that we often call organizational change management consultants, therapists, because they really are, their job is to go into the business, listen to all of the feedback and understand how to build out that change plan. And as we were kind of talking about yesterday, that's the insurance to make sure that your digital transformation is successful. This right here may seem like a very easy, common sense piece, but if you're not listening to the team and listening to what they need in order to make that user adoption level increase, then there's going to be disruption within your business, whether that's the customers impacted, we have disruption in our distribution, or we're a loss of revenue. This is really that receptive listening skill that needs to be cultivated within that process.
If you are a change manager or a therapist,
right,
you've got to be a great listener. You have to be a great listener. And I think one of the barriers to that is impatience. So we have a very hurried and impatient society right now compared to even 20, 30, 40 years ago. We want to put everything in the microwave. My son, so I have a son, he's a big guy, he likes to eat. The microwave is not fast enough for him. He will literally tap his foot. He'll stand in front of the microwave, tapping his foot, like, come on! Not realizing how incredibly fast that is. So we want to put everything in the microwave. We want it now. We don't want to wait. And I think the best listeners tend to be more patient people. But this takes effort. It doesn't come naturally for a lot of us. We have to work at it. That extra time to hear versus I know something to say and we want to blurt it real fast. So once again, if I'm working on this as a skill, just an emotional intelligence skill, take a couple more seconds, breathe, the world's probably not going to stop spinning if you don't get your genius comment out there. The other thing it does for me is it helps me a little bit more time, helps me filter a little better. So maybe my answer that was going to be insensitive or inappropriate or unintelligent, I have all kinds of thoughts like that, right? If I take a little extra time before I answer, the person's feeling heard, they're feeling more understood, and then my answer is probably going to be better. People have some rules about emails and texts. Maybe you don't return it, or you don't hit send at least for a certain amount of time.
Sure.
At one point, I wanted to develop an app that was like
that's a good idea.
that when you're texting.
Be careful. This is technology.
Oh yeah, someone can steal this just like we steal Sam's great quote. But it actually pauses and doesn't send for a period of time so that you don't go, oh, you know what? I didn't think that all the way through before I sent it. Great listeners, you can't be in a rush. You can't be going. And I realize there are those people who don't get to the point, or they are not good at straining for just the facts and the important information that we might need in our business. But it's still better, I think, in the long run to make sure those people don't feel unimportant and like what they have to say is not valued.
Okay, really interesting conversation. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll pick this up when we come back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 60. You can find new episodes every Wednesday. We're in the midst of a presentation from Jedd Hafer talking about emotional intelligence and change. Let's jump back to it.
Yeah, and we talked yesterday in the culture presentation about that feedback route and being intentional about that. And this is where we really can take the model of business process management development. We map out our manufacturing process. We map out our supply chain. We should also be mapping out how we make sure that there is a feedback loop within our digital transformation projects. Because again, that is our investment to make sure that awesome process that we just established is actually being used by our people, our technology, and our processes.
So, and this is so timely. We got another great comment from Sam. He said, it took me a long time to realize that even when I am right, the people who disagree with me are not necessarily wrong.
Sam should write a book.
I know. I'm going to need to go to Spain and hang out with this guy because I like the way he thinks a lot. It's funny because I wanted to talk a little bit about disagreement versus conflict. I don't have a slide for this, but I have some thoughts on, because this is inevitably going to happen. If we're going through change, certain things are inevitable. Some anxiety, some people are going to be excited, some people are going to be fearful. And also disagreement. Disagreement is inevitable. And one of my first times talking to Eric, we talked about this, that disagreement is good. I've read up on the Wright brothers.
Yeah. And
it turns out that they loved to spar and argue, and they would have some pretty powerful disagreements, but they got us up in the air.
Yeah, they did.
And if they never, there's no way they woke up, even though they were brothers with this very common goal, there's no way they woke up every day on the same page. At one point, one of them had to say, no, that's not the right way. No, that's not the right way. They were able to figure all that out enough, again, to get up in the air. So we need to not fear that disagreement part. It's conflict, which I know someone who defines it as disagreement with negative emotions, right?
Okay.
Conflict is disagreement, and we've added in a sprinkle or a big dash of negative emotion. And so an emotionally intelligent person has the ability to manage their negative emotions and hopefully disagree more respectfully and ultimately productively, there's always going to be more than one idea coming to the table. That's good. And if I have a company, I don't want 100 people who all think exactly the same way.
Sure.
And I definitely don't want 100 people who all think like me. That would be actually terrifying. But we have to be able to take a second, and I think there's some ego thing here. Take a second and say, okay, here's a different perspective. Do I have to view that as a threat coming into my little ego world? Or can I really listen to it, decide the merits of it, and can we discuss, even if we have differing or even opposing ideas, can we leave out the negative emotion? That's a sign of a healthy company.
Yeah,
we can disagree, and we're still buddies. We're still getting along and have a productive work relationship. Versus, what a scary thing. Any sign or hint of disagreement, and people turn on each other and get nasty. And now it's not that there's too much of this in our society right now. You're a bad person. It's not that you have a different view of this. I have to feel like I'm a better human being than you. And that means you have to be a terrible human being.
Absolutely. I think that's definitely well said. And then obviously this is a great quote. Maybe Sam wrote it. I don't know, but.
Yeah, we'll change the name at the bottom there. I was thinking about when an organization is going through a transformation or any change, any upheaval, and it could be just what's going on in the economy, or it could be we're making changes here internally. I can kind of choose, if I'm intentional about it, I can kind of choose between some level of optimism, and I don't want to be the unrealistic Pollyanna, pie in the sky, ridiculous people. Those people actually kind of annoy me, I must admit. The person who thinks everything's great no matter what. I think there was a Simpsons years ago, and it was the halftime show, and it was supposed to be like up with people, they're happy, and they called it hooray for everything. So in my mind, I'm always, this is a hooray for everything person. And I've been accused of being that guy, because I tend to be pretty upbeat and pretty positive, pretty optimistic. But we have this choice between some level of optimism and some level of pessimism and or anxiety. Because we don't know how it's really going to go.
Right.
We think we have a pretty good picture of how it's going to go, or maybe it's completely unknown, and then that's more anxiety, right? It's scarier. But the idea of this quote, and I've said this to people over the years, and then I saw the quote, and I was like, this sums it up better than I've been able to. Either way, we have to imagine this thing that hasn't happened yet. If I'm wondering how this is going to go, and I'm either worried about it or optimistic about it, either way, I'm imagining an outcome. And if I have that ability to worry and imagine this terrible future, it means I have an equal ability to imagine this going great, imagine a better outcome. Why not? Since fear, we know, paralyzes our thinking. It makes us all less productive human beings. Why not, if I have the ability to choose to a degree, why not choose the better imagined outcome, right? Why not choose the optimistic outcome? Again, I like working with optimistic people, because once in a while, I think the only reward of being a pessimist is that sometimes you're right. And then you get to go, see, I told you that wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
ERP, schmearp, see? And you get to be right, maybe pat yourself on the back for a second. But when you're an optimist, I think you put yourself and the people around you in a way more productive state. And I don't think I said this when I was on with Eric, but I read different biographies of athletes that were really successful. Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Wayne Gretzky, a whole bunch of others. And they all had, one of the things they had in common is they believed they were going to win. They believed they were going to make the shot. They believed it was going to go in. They believed they were good and that they were going to succeed. And I don't think that's a coincidence. If Michael Jordan shot every free throw going, I'm not very good, this is probably going to miss. He probably doesn't make nearly as many shots.
Thank you, Jedd. That was a really interesting conversation, really interesting topic. Love the way you framed a lot of those topics and discussions and really dug deeper and went a bit deeper into this topic, which we've had Jedd on talking before about emotional intelligence, but I like the way we sort of went through this in a more structured presentation style here for today's discussion. In fact, there's a few takeaways I want to touch on here when we come back from a quick break. We're going to, first of all, take that quick break, and we'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The bad news is if you miss that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to stratosphere2022.com. Go to stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings. And the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 replay. And again, go to stratosphere2022.com and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon.
Bad to the bone.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 60. We just had Jedd Hafer on the show giving his presentation talking about emotional intelligence and change. And we're getting super deep into the change management stuff here in today's episode, which I love. And by the way, last week's episode number 59, we also got deep into the aspect of change and change management. We had Dr. Christina Serrano on that episode talking about the psychology of change. So we really got deep into some of these similar topics or themes that Jedd touched on here today. So be sure to check out that episode if you haven't already. That was episode number 59, which was last week. And in this topic here with emotional intelligence, really interesting stuff. I love this topic because I think as leaders, especially in the tech space, we tend to lack that emotional intelligence at times. That emotional intelligence we need to lead people through change, to sort of translate all these moving parts of technology and data and artificial intelligence and cloud and all this stuff that it's so easy to get bogged down in all this technology stuff. And the best leaders out there, the people that are best at leading transformations, are the ones that can translate all that stuff into something meaningful and something tangible for humans, something that is realistic and pragmatic for humans and for the people within an organization. And so there's a couple layers of this. One is just the general leadership. When you look at transformations and why they succeed or fail, so much of that is tied to the type of leadership and the type of executive sponsorship, the type of organizational leadership that is demonstrated during a transformation. All that heavily influences how successful a transformation is or isn't. And so that emotional intelligence and sort of that EQ component of being a good leader is super important and oftentimes gets overlooked. So you need to have that emotional intelligence to be able to lead change in general. But then when you sort of go down another layer and then you look at how an organization is impacted by change and by the overall transformation, that's where emotional intelligence is arguably even more important, because now you're getting down to the individual level. You're getting down to specific individual ways that people are going to be impacted. It's empathy, understanding how people's jobs are going to change. It's just understanding the organizational dynamics, the culture of the organization, understanding what makes people tick, understanding how people are different, understanding if you're a multinational organization, how different national cultures might affect your organization, how different locations within the same nation, within the same country. If you have multiple locations, even that sometimes will have different cultures, different subcultures that you've got to deal with. So there's so many different moving parts from a cultural and a organizational perspective that are so important. And the larger, the more multinational you are, the more locations you have, the more diverse your employee base, the more, exponentially you're going to have these sorts of change issues and complexities that you need to deal with. And that's where that emotional intelligence becomes so important. So really important stuff from both layers, from the overall leadership perspective and making sure that you're emotionally intelligent as a leader, leading the transformation and helping your organization through the change. But as you get down into the nuts and bolts of what the change is and how people's jobs are going to change and how they adopt new technologies, how they change their business processes and their way of doing things, their roles and responsibilities day to day. As you get into those nuts and bolts, that emotional intelligence becomes very important as well. So again, it's just a good, I'd call it sort of an anecdote to all the techie speak and all the tech stuff that we get caught up in day to day within the digital transformation space. And it really sort of brings it back down to earth, brings it back down to, what we as humans can consume and what we as humans can adapt to or not. And really making sure that we're enabling that in a way that makes the most sense for our organization. So I think that's some really good lessons there. And so I really appreciate having Jedd on the show here today. And I really appreciate all the audience participation in questions and discussion we've had here today. Really enjoyed these topics, and I hope you all found it helpful as well. So we're going to wrap up for the day or for this episode, but I want to remind you that we do have new episodes every Wednesday on whatever platform you're listening or watching today. You can find new episodes every Wednesday, whether it's LinkedIn, YouTube, or one of the audio podcast platforms, or Twitter, or wherever you're watching or listening. Be sure to check us out every Wednesday. Also love to have you as a subscriber. So subscribe to our YouTube channel to get alerts of new notifications of this podcast, as well as other videos and content we put out. Be sure to follow us on social media as well. We put out daily content on social media, so be sure to check us out there. So we look forward to next time, but in the meantime, have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time on Transformation Ground Control. Take care and have a great week.